I'm Liz Faublas, and this is Currents. Why did the Newtown nightmare happen? Still no official answers, but Fox News is reporting that Adam Lanza may have snapped after learning that his mother, Nancy, planned to commit him to a psychiatric facility. And the Daily News reports she may have been afraid her troubled son was getting worse and she was losing him. Police are searching for all the answers, and they spent all day at the Lanza home in Newtown. The investigators are having difficulty retrieving data from the computer inside the house. They believe Lanza smashed the machine and murdered his mother, shooting her 4 times in the head. Then, without any digital fingerprints or a potential witness, Lanza left the home on his way to attack Sandy Hook School. 26 died. According to divorce records, Nancy was responsible for his medical care, and detectives are waiting for results of drug tests. Word tonight from the White House, the president is appointing a task force led by Vice President Biden in the wake of the massacre to investigate violent crime.
This is not some Washington commission. This is not something where folks are going to be studying the issue for 6 months and publishing a report that gets read and then pushed aside. This is a team that has a very specific task to pull together real reforms right now.
The president says he expects policy recommendations, including new gun control laws, in January. Meantime, 2 more angels of Newtown have been buried, each child only 6 years old. James Mattioli and Jessica Ricos, Jessica's mom.
It's still not real that my little girl, who's so full of life and who wants a horse so badly and who's gonna get cowgirl boots for Christmas, isn't coming home.
The struggle to regain some sense of normalcy for school students continues. Teachers are trying to explain Friday's massacre to the youngsters in ways that are appropriate to their ages.
It's a really big thing in the world right now, and how can't you think about it? Like, if it's so close to you.
At Newtown High School, extra police were on hand to support the students and give them a sense of security. One student coming back to school said he didn't know what to expect, but everyone is just exhausted and upset.
My mom was really upset about it. She was just crying. Like, I have a little sister that is in like daycare. She's 3. She would be going to Sandy Hook next year, and she was just like crying, like thinking about what if that was her.
Current students from Sandy Hook are expected to resume classes at a nearby school after the holidays, and the Catholic educators with the U.S. Bishops' Conference are providing resources to help students cope with the horror of the tragedy. 3 key points they are telling parents and teachers: assure children that they are safe, keep explanations age appropriate, and limit exposure to TV coverage of the event. Well, perhaps one way to measure the way the Newtown nightmare has changed our lives, at least for the time being. This is a bulletproof backpack for children, and sales are said to be skyrocketing. The Utah company that makes them normally produces body armor for soldiers.
At this point, it's transcended to everyone. Anyone who's sending the child out into the world, seeing what can happen now, they want to protect their children.
And sadly, we are not alone. On Monday, we reported on the stabbing of school children in China. Now, stunning surveillance video has been released on government television. An agent of evil is seen running into the schoolyard, striking a child. Then a frightening scene. The terrified youngsters run down a hall, searching for safety, and the stalker follows, knife in hand. 23 elementary school children and an elderly man were wounded, but all will survive. The official Chinese government news agency reports that the madman who attacked wanted to do things, quote, to impress the world. And in England, a baby girl is now home in time for Christmas, and her parents are calling her a miracle. When Madalena Dowse was born, she weighed only 13 ounces. Now, there's a policy in England that babies weighing less than a pound 16 ounces are cast aside without any care. In Madalena's case, even though she was 3 ounces under the minimum, doctors fought for her life and saved the child. Today, she's 6 months old, weighs 5.5 pounds, and is expected to grow into a healthy child. It seems that when doctors weighed her at birth to determine if she should live or die, the scale did register 16 ounces. A pair of scissors left on the scale provided that difference. Welcome back. Good news tonight in Brooklyn. The Sacred Heart of Jesus is back in Williamsburg after a statue that adorned the outside of Saints Peter and Paul was stolen 2 weeks ago. Kathleen and George DeMerrill of New Jersey are giving their own statue of the Sacred Heart to the church. Kathleen, who is 70, said she was appalled by the crime and thinks it's good that her statue will be in a nice new sacred place. She's had it in her family for more than 100 years. The pastor of Saints Peter and Paul says this proves there are still good people in the world. And the Nativity is back alongside a public road in Michigan, but it took a 4-year court fight to get it there. After 67 seasons of displaying the Nativity in Warren, Michigan, the atheists resorted to their usual tactic, complaining. The county ordered the display removed, but the creche's caretaker fought back, and a federal appeals court said okay earlier this year. Christmas is less than a week away, and the U.S. bishops are worried that we may fall off the cliff a week later. So tonight, an action alert from the bishops calling on Catholics to contact Congress about the fiscal cliff, which is Washington jargon for the financial mess that could come at the end of the year. The bishops want us to emphasize to Congress that any budget cuts should not hurt the least of us. Another mess is predicted for the end of the year, the end of the world. It all has to do with the Mayan calendar and wild rumors on the internet. In China, authorities have locked up more than 500 people, charging them with spreading the rumors in all areas of the country. Meantime, Pope Benedict and the Vatican astronomer both have told us to put no faith in any of the rumors. But what of the Mayans themselves?
A 20-minute drive from the nearest highway leads you to the community of Yaxuna. Women in traditional Mayan dress run errands. Many of the men live and work in tourist areas, returning twice a month. Life moves slowly here in a town of less than 700.
In some ways, it's a very traditional community. You see a lot of these kind of thatched buildings behind me all around the town, and there's no cell phone reception to speak of at all. But in other ways, it closely resembles what you might expect from a small Mexican town.
Just on the outskirts of town, evidence of an ancient civilization. Mayans are thought to have lived in the area since 200 BC. Santos Esteban Chuk is an artisan who makes carvings sold at tourist sites. As the end of the calendar looms, he feels a sense of history. We're lucky to see how this era ends, he says, and hopefully we'll see how the other one starts. Lots of people say it's the end of the world, but we don't believe that. The Mexican government has been trying to encourage modern housing by subsidizing cement. But old construction methods die hard. The head of the community enforces local laws, such as a ban on the sale of alcohol. I ask him if he really believes in the Mayan calendar. 100%, he says. We are descendants of the Mayans. We don't live in a city. Whatever we learn is from what our grandfathers told us. They were teaching us things about the stars, about when it rains. Not everybody shares in that tradition. Teresa Kanu Ulmesh is making tortillas for lunch. Like much of the older generation, she only knows a Mayan dialect, which is still spoken by more than 1 million people in Mexico. As for the calendar, I don't know anything about it, she says. I can't read or write. A world away from the tourists and doomsday hysteria, a traditional way of life looks set to continue long after 2012.
And we are set to continue with currents and news about the religions of the world after the break. Welcome back. More than 8 of every 10 people in the world identify with a religion. That's the findings in the latest research by the Pew Group. They studied more than 230 countries. Christianity is the #1 religion in the world. More than 31% of the world's population call themselves Christians, followed by Muslims at 23%. While the rich heritage of the Christian religion, in large measure, is stored inside the Vatican Library. Now, a massive new project to digitize the contents. The head curator tells us about the undertaking and about the library.
People often think that the Vatican Library is a place where secrets are kept. The point of the library was exactly the opposite. It was to make information accessible. And at the time, a book was something very expensive and very hard to come by. So it was really a public service that was being offered by the Pope to put a large collection of books at the disposal of scholars. Probably our most famous manuscript is Codex Vaticanus of the Bible from the 4th century. There are family archives which were brought as a whole collection into the library, like the archives of the Barberini family, for example. Very interesting for historians. Obviously, the library needs to digitize all of its approximately 80,000 manuscripts for conservation purposes. One of the big advantages of doing a mass digitization of the manuscripts is that fragile, especially fragile items will not need to be handled anymore.
With a library of 82,000 manuscripts, each at least 500 pages, the digital project will need 45 petabytes of storage. Now, by the way, 1 petabyte equals 1,000 terabytes. Our religious heritage is also founded upon the sacrifices of our martyrs. Now, the stories of 3 young nurses who gave their lives for the faith.
On October 23, 1936, in the midst of the Spanish Civil War, 3 young nurses from the International Red Cross were murdered as they cared for the wounded victims at a hospital in northern Spain. The Catholic Church could soon declare them martyrs. Their names are Olga, 23, Pilar, 25, and Octavia, 41. All 3 were from Astorga in León province. When the war began, they volunteered to help care for the wounded. While they were not the first volunteers killed in the war, they were the first executed because of their faith. The person leading their beatification process is hoping to present their case to the Vatican in the coming weeks. One of those direct witnesses says they heard how one of the guards asked, "Where are the nuns?" The other answers, "They're praying." They could have fled, but they didn't. They didn't because they wanted to remain next to the wounded soldiers from both sides of the fighting. For them, there was no other option than the humanitarian one. Their biographers say that since they were young, all 3 were a prime example of service to others. They worked on the catechesis, collected clothing for the poor, and volunteered with St. Vincent de Paul societies to visit the sick. They say they were examples of the Christian commitment to society.
En ellas hay una motivación de fe clarísima. Tenemos una carta.
There is a very clear motivation and faith for them. We have a letter written by Pilar Gullón to her family. It says, "Each time I hear the bells for Mass, I run out the door." They're simple phrases, but they show that their motivation was in their personal lives.
Les motivaba, sobre todo, digo, como coherencia de toda la historia, las historias personales.
Their motivation led the 3 young nurses with their commitment and service to others to the ultimate sacrifice, their deaths.
Nosotros no hablamos de...
We're not talking about the victims of the war, we're talking about the martyrs, people that died because of religious persecution. We're not addressing political parties, no political overtones. What we want to do is recognize the men and women that gave their life in situations contrary to their faith.
Contraria a la fe.
After getting raped, the 3 were killed. The next day, their bodies were thrown into a mass grave. Only after peace returned to the region were they able to identify their bodies and send them to the Cathedral of St. John of Astorga, their hometown.
Well, our hometown Brooklyn native Dorothy Day is being promoted for canonization. New York's Cardinal Dolan is a strong supporter of her cause. Just who is Dorothy Day?
Her story is just such an incredible, beautiful story, and I think it's very important to share it.
Somebody put The Long Loneliness in my hands, Dorothy Day's memoir of growing up, the San Francisco earthquake, going to college, getting involved in the socialist movement, writers, leaving college after 2 years, going to New York, getting involved almost immediately in most exciting circles, radical, literary, journalistic. Of course, she was a very attractive woman. That must have helped. But she's only 19. And she was out, she was drinking with Eugene O'Neill.
She was arrested with the suffragettes in Washington and went to prison. She worked on radical journals, interviewed revolutionaries. Her friends were leftists of various kinds. But always there was this kind of hunger for something else.
Of course, there are stories in the late teens where she would be sort of on the town. You know, she was saying she flung roses, you know, but she would find herself at times at St. Joseph's Church in the West Village praying, you know. And part of what really attracted her was the sacramentality of things, the sacramentals, like light, water, incense, oil, texture, bread, wine, those things, but also a sense that this was the church of the working poor.
There were also a lot of really painful, sorrowful times in her life. One that she never wrote about, but that was certainly very important, was an unhappy love affair that she had that resulted in her pregnancy and resulted in her having an abortion. This man she loved said he would leave her if she didn't have an abortion. She had the abortion, he left her anyway, and it was a terrible experience. Years later, she's living on Staten Island with a man she really loves. She has this overwhelming sense of happiness and kind of domesticity after all the strife and turmoil of her earlier life. She finds that she's pregnant, and she experiences this as an extraordinary feeling of grace, forgiveness, joy. And in her joy, her heart turns to God, and she decides, I want my daughter to be baptized, and that means I should be baptized as well. The man she was living with, whom she called her common-law husband, was a rational kind of guy, an agnostic, an anarchist. He wouldn't have anything to do with marriage or with the church, and so it meant separation from him and the love of her life. But anyway, she separated from him and then spent several years trying to figure out how to live out her life as a Catholic, but still holding on to that radical commitment to social justice and to the poor, and wondering how the two of these were put together. And it was 1932 that she went to, as a journalist, to cover a hunger march of the unemployed in Washington, D.C. that was organized by a lot of her old communist friends. And she found herself there on the sidewalk watching this parade of, you know, ragged men, and thought, now where are the Catholics, you know, leading this march? But it came together for her when she returned from Washington and found this guy, Peter Morin, waiting for her. He'd heard about her through another Catholic editor, said, I think you have some ideas in common, and he'd been looking for someone to partner with, to set in motion a kind of program that he had. He was a great visionary, but he was not an activist, and he was a very impractical person. He said his job was to enunciate the ideas, but Dorothy was the person who kind of set it in motion. And the first thing he said was, we have to start a newspaper. Well, that appealed to her because she came from a newspaper background. This paper would promote the social teachings of the church. Secondly, there should be houses of hospitality that would provide, you know, for the immediate needs of people, not through the impersonal agency of the state, but through personal commitment of Christians one for another. And then third, he wanted to start farming communes that would represent some kind of alternative to the industrial urban civilization.
Up next, from Astoria, Queens, a Christmas novena as Currents continues after the break. Robert Bork, a Catholic and an American legal scholar, has died. He is most widely remembered for his nomination to the U.S. Supreme Court by Ronald Reagan. A furious political battle erupted and the Senate voted down that nomination. Robert Bork was 85. Finally tonight, we travel with our bishop to Astoria, Queens for a Filipino tradition in preparation for the birth of Jesus. It's called Simbang Gabi. The words mean night worship. Bishop DeMarcio explains the history behind the words, but first, he celebrated Mass.
We are having the Simbang Gabi Mass here at Immaculate Conception. The Simbang Gabi Mass is actually our pre-Christmas Masses in the Filipino tradition. I would say it's pre-Christmas because we already are singing Christmas songs at this particular Mass, and this has been a tradition for many hundreds of years already in the Philippines.
The Filipino people are very devoted Catholics, and this is one of the signs of their devotion. What it recalls is the Filipino custom in their home country that the farmers on the way to the farms would gather early, very early in the morning.
In the Philippines, we do it 4 o'clock in the morning. Or 12 midnight. This is the preparation for the birth of Jesus Christ. And we have to complete it for 9 days. It's a novena. We call that a novena for 9 days.
Mama Mary carried Jesus for 9 months, right? So one day is 1 month. Of course, because of the bishop, it's very special, and we have a beautiful singing, our choir.
Every time we sing the song and every time we serve God, we make it a point to fill the song. And before we sing, we actually have an anointing prayer so that all the evil spirit will be cast away and then everything will be in good mood.
And we recognize that although it is not already here, the birth of the Lord, in a certain sense, it has already happened. It happened 2,000 years ago. But what yet has not happened is the second coming of Jesus. And that's another thing we prepare for during this Advent season.
We recently formed this Filipino Mass, 3 years. We're only 3 years old that we have a Filipino Mass, Filipino community here in Astoria. We're blessed, and I thank everybody.
We thank Monsignor Pereresi for really, he's the one who encouraged us to have this Filipino Mass and this and his support. He's so supportive, and we want to thank you, Monsignor. God bless you. And Merry Christmas and Happy New Year.
Maligayang Pasko sa inyong lahat at manigong bagong taon.
And thank you for joining us. We leave you with more from Astoria and the preparations for the birth of our Lord. For all of us here at Currents, I'm Liz Faublas. Thank you for watching and have a good night.